Let's just kick off with a couple of things from Donald Trump. In my view, one of the great speeches that's ever taken place at the United Nations. But first of all, here he is, just one of his many comments on climate change.
Years ago in the 1920s and the 1930s, they said, global cooling will kill the world. We have to do something. Then they said global warming will kill the world, but then it started getting cooler, so now they could just call it climate change, because that way they can't miss. It's climate change, because if it goes higher or lower, whatever the hell happens, there's climate change. It's the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world, in my opinion.
The greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world, Rita. I don't disagree with him, I have to say it.
No, and he has absolute disdain for the UN. He knows it has become a destructive body that is completely not fit for purpose, but he goes along there and he tells them what's what. And you know what, James? I remember when he gave an address in his first term, and the German contingent were there giggling and laughing at him as he told them, you have become dependent on Russian energy, Russian gas, and it's going to be to your detriment. And they thought it was hilarious. They don't think it's hilarious anymore, do they?
No, they don't think it's hilarious. And in fact, you know, it wasn't just climate, but it was also the other issues of immigration in Palestine. That
well, let's take immigration.
Really,
let's
have a look at the immigration, what Trump had to say about that.
Not only is the UN not solving the problems it should, too often, it's actually creating new problems for us to solve. The best example is the #1 political issue of our time, the crisis of uncontrolled migration. It's uncontrolled. Your countries are being ruined. The United Nations is funding an assault on Western countries and their borders. In 2024, the UN budgeted $372 million in cash assistance to support an estimated 624,000 migrants journeying into the United States.
And I mean, how great and clear was that? Because he went on later on in the speech to say, your countries are going to hell. Going to hell. He used really strong language about this. Donald Trump is an ardent nationalist. He believes in his country, and he believes not only in his country, but he believes that what makes each country unique and distinctive should be preserved against the globalists who want to see them all homogenized into a one-world government sort of affair. And this point here about the migration was so important. We see it in Europe. We see this in Australia. And in a little bit, we're going to have to talk, I think, about how so many on the left and the progressive left are trying to shut down this really important discussion about what's happening to all of our countries,
and not
Rita.
just the left. There's some so-called conservative commentators who seem to be missing the point as well. And this homogenised...
Too many.
It's not throughout the world, because we don't see this drive to have immigration and diversity in countries across the world. It's a Western project. It's to dilute the West's culture and influence, and he put it all out there. I spoke to Douglas Murray shortly after that speech. He wrote a book about a decade ago about the strange death of Europe. And it goes beyond Europe. It's happening right here in Australia and elsewhere. And for too long, if you wanted to speak about this, if you wanted to speak about migration numbers in terms of anything other than economic factors, it was almost taboo. It was almost, oh, well, no, this is racism, this is bigotry. No, it's not. To talk about preserving values, and you can preserve your values and still have migration. You just have an obligation on those who come to your country to respect those values and to assimilate into those values, rather than have their own set of values that often are at odds with that country's way of life. And that's what we have not really spoken about in this country much either.
Well, that's the thing.
Well, just picking up on the thing Rita said before about Donald Trump going into the United Nations, and this was the key thing, because he basically said the emperor has no clothes. He ripped off the blanket and showed the United Nations to us for what it is, because it's the United Nations that has driven the whole climate change hoax, scam. He called it a con job. He kept repeating these words. in the belly of the beast, where it all comes from. The entire climate change narrative pushed around the world is driven by the United Nations. Then the same with immigration. He pointed to the fact that it's the United Nations who are pushing and driving the immigration into Europe, these vast numbers of uncontrolled, as he said. Now, we have a different problem in here. We have controlled migration, but the Albanese government, but the Albanese government has kind of gone, okay, anybody, come on in you come.
Yeah, this is a big myth that we need to address here in this country. I mean, everybody says, oh, we're an island, we control who comes to the country, we know who they are and all of that. And yeah, sure, fine, we stopped the boats. John Howard stopped the boats. That's absolutely right. But, we also know so many other things are really rotten about this system, to the point now where it is almost uncontrolled, or it's barely controlled. You have got more than half of the people here on student visas are not here going to a university. They're going to a trade school or some sort of thing, and they may or may not be doing the course. There's a lot of these ghost colleges. You have got in this country 100,000 people who have exhausted every single last avenue, tribunal, court of appeal, all taxpayer funded, by the way, to adjudicate their claims to be an asylum seeker, their claims to be a refugee. Well, got 100,000 of them. They've exhausted every single option. They're still here. They're allowed to live and work in the community, essentially illegally, because there is no appetite to actually go and deport them. So everybody knows that the system is a soft touch. You come, you apply, you stay, they kick you out, you're still here.
Yeah, no, and you're absolutely right. That's because the government is useless. And that's the point. It's uncontrolled because we have a useless government. But the useless government are uncontrolling everything. They don't control the economy properly. They certainly don't control, they're not looking after our free speech. We'll get on to that.
Sorry, I just need to say one thing.
The system is there and the government is useless. That is I agree with you that they're very, very similar. But in Europe, it is literally just waves and waves coming through.
It is.
But here, the government, you're right, should be controlling. They have the levers. They should be controlling. You're 100% correct on that. But let's go to the next thing, which I think was really important. And we're going to talk about digital ID in a tick as well, with what's happening on that. But the third thing of Trump's was, of course, directly attacking Australia, Canada, France, and Britain for recognising Palestine. I'll be talking about this when I talk about Netanyahu's speech later on in the show. But have a listen to Trump here.
Unfortunately, Hamas has repeatedly rejected reasonable offers to make peace. We can't forget October 7th, can we? Now, as if to encourage continued conflict, some of this body is seeking to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state. The rewards would be too great for Hamas terrorists for their atrocities. This would be a reward for these horrible atrocities, including October 7th, even while they refuse to release the hostages or accept a ceasefire. Instead of giving to Hamas and giving so much, because they've taken so much, this could have been solved so long ago. But instead of giving in to Hamas's ransom demands, those who want peace should be united with one message: release the hostages now. Just release the hostages now.
And what great words from President Trump there. Release the hostages now. And more important, or as importantly, he's saying, why are Australia, and other nations rewarding the Hamas terrorists, the abductors? Why are they rewarding them? Rita.
And it's also putting a rift between our relationship with our biggest and most important ally, America. So again, why are we doing this when it's not in Australia's national interest to be doing this?
Exactly. James.
Well, this whole thing with Palestine has been going on since the very start. Like, this whole Palestinian recognition was entirely predictable. We saw the very weak response. Let us not forget the very weak both sides' response that this government had to October 7th after it happened. Penny Wong calling for restraint, right? And now you've got this, what I call the Albanese-Wong doctrine, although it's not really a doctrine, that implies some sort of high Kissingerian thought. But no, it's more of a sort of a notion, and it's this sort of idea that, well, if we recognize them, hey, Palestinians, that somehow you're going to wind up with them wanting to make peace. But of course, this is always in the Middle East the triumph of hope over reality, right? Because we know what happens with this movie. We've seen it a million times before. Hamas, of course, declares this a huge win. All he has done is to legitimize the bad guys, and he's even diffident about even calling the sides of this thing bad guys and good guys.
And Trump showed in his first term, he really showed that decades of dogma were incorrect. The US, the West, thought that you can't have peace, you can't have normalisation with Arab nations without the Palestinian issue being resolved. And Donald Trump showed through the Abraham Accords that is not the case. And he really turned everything around. And for France, UK, Australia to ignore that learning and just to go back to this notion of we have to recognise a state. What are you recognising? How is that even workable? How are you going to, who's going to be the authority there? Are you going to have Hamas 2.0 negotiating with Israel? Is that the two-state solution?
Well, but the point
Where is the
no, sorry, James,
around
you go.
this?